scripture reading this morning is going to be from Ephesians chapter 5. I'm reading from the ESV. Verses 1 through 5. Therefore be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us, and gave himself for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. But sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not be named among you, as is proper among saints. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolishness, nor talk or crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. For you may be sure of this, that everyone who is sexually immoral or impure, or who is covetous, that is an idolater, has no inheritance in the kingdom of Christ and God.
Good morning. If you want to keep your Bibles open to Ephesians 5, that's going to be our main text this morning. I see a handful of visitors who came in after class. Thank you for coming. It's good to see you with us today. I don't want you to get crazy about this first part in Ephesians. If you're, especially those of you, this is what happens after this sermon. There's a handful of you who say, how do I mark that? What do I do in my Bible? I want to see what you've done. And I really like it. I know that's shocking to most of you, but I really like those conversations. And so this is for you. Don't get crazy about this part and how you mark it, because I don't know the answer to that yet. But I think that there's a new section that we're starting today. So in chapter 4 and verse 1, what we're looking for is the word walk. Walk is like the start of a heading. This is the start of a new section. So in chapter 4 and verse 1 it said, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling to which you have been called. And in the next 16 verses, or down to verse 16, that whole section is about unity. And so if you wanted to call it something, you could say, walk in unity, be together. And this is Paul saying, based upon what Christ has done for us, to make it possible for us to be a part of his family, practical thing number 1, walk in unity, be together. Number 2 would start in chapter 4 and verse 17. Now this I say and testify in the Lord, that you must no longer walk as the Gentiles. And then he goes on to describe all of the things that we just finished doing in our last several lessons. And that one is what I would call walk in holiness. So walk in unity, be together. That's where you have the one God, one Spirit, one baptism, and the apostles and the prophets who give us the one teaching. Walk in unity, be together. But number 2, walk in holiness. Don't walk like the Gentiles, and that's where we did things like renew our mind, put away falsehood, don't be angry and don't sin, don't steal. We walk in holiness. That's one of the things that Christians are supposed to do. And today we're starting chapter 5 and verse 1. And so you can see, I think, another thing that happens here. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up. So if you wanted, you could say, and I think this is probably what's happening in Ephesians, that there are these big categories: walk in unity, walk in holiness, walk in love. And so our major question this morning would be, what does it mean to walk in love? What does that look like in verses 1 through 6? And there are two big ways that we're going to talk about this. There's 3 things that are listed. What are they in verse 3? In verse 3, there's 3 things listed that have to do with our behavior, how we live and what we do with our lives. And then in verse 4, there's 3 things listed that have to do with our mouths and how we talk. And so we're going to break it up into these three different things and talk about what each of these means. Now, I want you to appreciate something with me about these things that we're going to talk about. A lot of the words that are listed, I've spent the last week digging into these words and trying to understand them and to say, okay, God through Paul said, Ryan, don't do this thing anymore. And I hear a word and I immediately think something and I say, okay, that's what God said, don't do it. And normally that's right, like, don't do it. But when you dig into the word, what happens a lot of times with these words is it's not what I think it is. And so we're going to be trying to figure that out at least a little bit. So let's look at verse 3 first of all. These are the first three things that we're going to look at. But, number 1, sexual immorality and all impurity or covetousness must not even be named among you. So don't do these things. Don't even talk about these things. They're not even to be named among you. They're not to be a part of our lives. So number 1 is going to be sexual immorality. We talked about that this morning. Sexual immorality, porneia. That is the big blanket word that describes every kind of sexual immorality. So in our class this morning, we did it like this. Sexual immorality that involves a marriage is called adultery. Sexual immorality that involves 2 men or 2 women is called homosexuality. Sexual immorality that involves an animal is called bestiality. Sexual immorality that involves family members is called incest. And so there's lots of different kinds of sexual immorality. But what Paul does in this section is he says, just don't do any of it. Don't even let it be named among you. And there's probably not much that I need to say about this word, except for this one thing. Leave your marker here, because this is going to be our text, and we're going to come back. But go over to Galatians chapter 5. And I know that Galatians 5 will be familiar to a lot of you, and you probably don't need to turn over there. But this is just one of the things that I want to emphasize, especially right now. There's a lot. The Bible has a lot to say about sexual sin. And you are sitting there and you're going to say, yeah, I know, there's a lot about it. No. Let me tell you when you begin to really, really understand just how much the Bible has to say about sexual sin. When you start doing daily Bible readings with your kids, and I'm not joking, it is every single day. Hey, Dad, what's a prostitute? It's like, well, I guess we're doing that now, or try to explain it on, and it's almost every chapter in the Bible, every list of things. It's really something that it's like, you don't really appreciate just how much the Bible has to say about sexual sin. And the way that I'll just try to illustrate it in this point, besides I think what I just did is the best point. You read it with your kids and you feel it every single day. But the works of the flesh, starting in verse 19, the works of the flesh, and he lists, I think there's like 15 of them. I think there's 15 plus and things like these. But notice that the very first one in the list is sexual immorality. And this is what I would like for you to appreciate about that is just Google this. You don't even have to know the Bible very well. Go to ChatGPT. Say, show me all of the places in the New Testament where there's a sin list. They're called vice lists. And that's like this, where there's a list of things. Sexual immorality, impurity, sensuality, idolatry, sorcery, enmity, strife. There's a list. It's called a vice list. Find all of the places in the New Testament where there are lists of things that are wrong. And check this out. In almost every single one of them, sexual immorality is first. And it's just something to notice. Like it's not something that can probably be overdone from a teaching and preaching standpoint, because God sure didn't feel like it could be overdone. It's on every page of the Bible virtually. And so this concept is something that we probably should pay attention, we definitely should pay attention to. If you are a Christian, born again through Jesus Christ to new life with God, sexual immorality is not even to be named among you. So whatever the sin is that tempts you, whether it's on your phone or your computer, or maybe it's just in your heart, and whatever the sin is that tempts you, put it away. It doesn't belong in the Christian's life. Okay, number 2 on the list is all impurity. And this is one of the things that I especially wanted to focus on with some of these words, because, would you give me a head nod on this one? Tell me if I'm not alone on this, because I don't think I'm probably alone on this one. When I say impurity in this list, let these things not even be named among you, sexual immorality and impurity. Does your mind, when you hear impurity, does your mind gravitate towards sexual sin when you hear impurity? For the most part, I get some head nods, and Adam was like, yes, Ryan. I appreciate that. Here's a definition, and you wouldn't be wrong, because this is actually what the definition said. The dictionary biblical language, it says, it can be sexual impurity. So I'm not wrong for my mind just sexual immorality, impurity, sexual related stuff. It can be that, but also, this is the rest of the definition, but also filth and unclean things. And so just think about it like this in the nature of the word. Impurity, something that makes you not pure. That's not limited to sexual stuff. That includes a whole big category of things that we face in our life from every single day. And so with impurity, this might be one of the ways that you think about it. What does impurity mean, and how am I going to calibrate my thinking to line up with God's thinking in Ephesians 5 here, so that I can know what I'm supposed to do and what I'm not supposed to do? Ask this question: is this thing a pure thing before God? And if your answer is no, it's not a pure thing before God, then the response is, then let it not even be named among you, because it makes you impure. It's either pure or it's not. And so that could be any kind of number of things. Okay, number 3, this is another one. I think if you have a New American Standard Version, you're fine. I think also the New King James Version, you're fine on this one. The ESV, I'm going to cross this word out in my ESV, and I'm going to write another word in there. It says, verse 3, sexual immorality, all impurity, or covetousness. I know that there's a special definition that goes especially with covetousness. But for the most part, this is just kind of my own personality. I try to stay away from Bible words, Bibleese, Christianese. You know what I'm talking about? There's like this specialized language that exists among people who read the Bible, and we say things all the time like, we're supposed to admonish one another. What does admonish mean? I don't know. It's in the Bible. Okay, well, let's use words that we know what they mean, right? And so, if you go back to chapter 4 and verse 19, this is really useful for me in my ESV. It says, don't walk like the Gentiles used to, because they have become callous and have given themselves up to sensuality. And it says that they are greedy to practice every kind of impurity. That word greedy is the exact same word as covetousness in chapter 5 and verse 3. So your New American Standard Version says, don't let these things be named among you: sexual immorality, impurity, or greed. Don't be a greedy person is the main idea there. And so I'm just going to write that in my Bible. There's a couple things that I want you to think about greedy, though. Just looking at the definitions and thinking about this, it helped me to try and, put flesh and blood on the bones. This is BDAG, greed. Desiring to have more than one's due. Greed is not necessarily desiring to have more than I have. It's desiring to have more than what is owed to me. That's greed. Or here's another definition in Lowe and Nida: a strong desire to acquire more and more material possessions, to possess more things than other people have, all irrespective of need. And so greed would be the sense of not necessarily what I need. Greed is, that's a really nice pink shirt that your wife let you borrow this morning. I'm just seeing if you're awake. You're a brand new dad. You need some help. You know what I'm talking about? So that's a really nice shirt, and I don't have a pink shirt like that. And so I see somebody who does, and it's like, I want that. This is part of the definition. It's or to possess more things than other people have. And so when you think of greed, don't just think about somebody who has a lot of stuff. That's not necessarily greed. Greed is, I want a lot of stuff, even stuff that's not owed to me. I wish I had it. I want that stuff. Or here's somebody who has more stuff than me, and I want it not because I need it or in any way care to have it, but because you have it. And I want more than you is the point here with greed. And so what he's saying in this passage is, Christians are not that way. We're not supposed to be like that. We're not greedy. Here's a passage to go with it. If you want to mark a cross-reference, it's Luke chapter 12 and verse 15. Jesus says this: take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, or some of your versions say greed. Take care and be on guard against all greed, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions. Don't be the kind of person who thinks that this life is all about your stuff and having stuff and getting more stuff. It's specifically listed in this list that Christians are not even to have these things named among us. Okay, so there's three behaviors. Sexual immorality, we don't do that. Impurity, things that make us impure, we don't do that. Greedy, being greedy people, covetous people, we don't do that. Now let's talk about three ways that we don't talk. And this is where I think you probably need to start thinking through this carefully. Let's read all of verse 4. Let there be no filthiness, nor foolish talk, nor crude joking, which are out of place, but instead let there be thanksgiving. So the three things on this list. Let there be no filthiness. Okay. What does your mind go straight to when you hear filthy language? Let there be no filthiness. Bad words. Right? That's where my mind goes right to. Don't say bad words. And that's true. Except for this. This is all three of these words, the filthiness, the foolish talk, and the crude joking. These words are they're a little bit difficult to exactly define because they're only used in the New Testament in this one place. Each of these three words are not used anywhere else in the New Testament. So it's kind of hard to define it a little bit. But in classical Greek, which is earlier than New Testament Greek, in classical Greek, this word filthiness was used as the opposite of things that are beautiful. So you have things that are good and beautiful, And then you have the opposite of that, things that are not. And filthy is not the word that I would use to describe the opposite of what is good and beautiful. The word that I would use, these are the words that Becky and I use in our house to talk about this. Not for the Bible thing, it's just the way that we describe this thing. We talk about ugly words. Because that's the opposite of beautiful, right? There's things that are good and beautiful, and the opposite of that is things that are ugly. And if you think about it like this, then I think ugly words definitely categorizes bad language, but there's a whole lot more speech that's just ugly that we shouldn't be using. And maybe that's a word that's not a bad word in your home, but it's just not a nice good word. It's an ugly word. So don't use it anymore. We don't say ugly things. Or this is the way that Becky and I talk about this with our kids. It's not necessarily that sometimes you're using ugly words. You're saying ugly things. Do you know what I'm talking about? It's possible to talk about people in a way that's ugly. And so I'm going to write that one in my Bible for this word because I think a better definition would be the opposite of good and beautiful, which is ugly. Don't talk like that. Bad words plus more. We don't do that. Okay, next, 1, 2, 3, 4. Number 4, right? No, 5. Number 5 on the list, foolish talk. Don't do foolish talk. So this one is easy enough. I like this one. This one is easy enough because it's a compound word. Morologea. Moro is the word that we get moron from, and logea is speech. And so this word is, don't talk like a moron. I'm serious. That's what the word is. And that's the reason why our translators have called it foolish speech. Don't talk like a fool. And if you want some definitions, you can find this word outside of the New Testament in other places. Plato used this word to talk about people who babble on when they're drunk. You know what a drunk person does, and they just talk and they say dumb stuff, and they're just babbling and going on and on about stuff, and it's like, oh, you're just drunk. Stop talking. That's foolish talk. That's stuff that we don't do. Here's another way that you could define the word or think about it. There's one Roman writer who used this word to describe, like, philosophers. People who use big, fancy words and flourishing language. I'm not even sure that flourishing is the right way to describe it, but you know what I'm talking about. Big, fancy words with language that's all woven together, and you listen to someone talk, and you finish, and you go, that was beautiful. I don't have any idea what you just said, but it was the most beautiful thing that I've ever heard in my life. There's a Roman writer who says, that's foolish talk. To talk like that is foolish. Or another example of what foolish talk looks like. This one might hit a little closer to home for me. There's graffiti. Just like graffiti exists in our world today, graffiti existed in the ancient world. And so there's an example of graffiti where somebody wrote, Gaius loves his donkey more than his wife. And somebody said as an example, that's foolish talk. That's moron language. Okay, so whatever it is, however you think about it, don't do it. Talking like a fool, foolish talk. The last thing on the list, and then we'll get into some of the concluding points here. Here's something that we don't do. In my ESV, it says crude joking. But this is another one that's getting crossed out in my Bible. Because crude joking doesn't get the job done for me on this one. What do you think of when you hear the word crude joking? Dirty jokes. Right? I mean, automatically. No crude joking and you say, oh, dirty jokes. No dirty jokes. That's not what's happening. here. I'm not saying now it's fine, go tell dirty jokes. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that's not what this word is. That's not what we're talking about right now. The New American Standard Version, New American Standard, New King James Net Bible, I think you're getting closer to what's going on with this word. It's coarse jesting. So the way that this word is used in the ancient world is it's a positive thing. It's actually a positive thing. Somebody who's witty or quick. You know what I'm talking about? Somebody who's real quick-minded. I think Jim's one of these. It comes fast, and I love the wit. I love wit, and it's a positive thing. But have you ever known somebody who's quick and witty, but they use that quick wit to cut you? Do you know what I'm talking about? That's coarse jesting. And you think of coarse in the sense of sandpaper. There's fine sandpaper and there's coarse sandpaper. And the coarse is what cuts you. And so one definition for this is joking around that goes too far and hurts people. Or there's a Bible passage about this. Proverbs 26 and verses 18. Who throws firebrands, arrows, and death is the man who deceives his neighbor and says, I'm only joking. So it's like, I'm going to say some super mean and rude and hateful and hurtful thing to you. And you're going to be like, what's up, man? And I'm like, okay, 6 things. I imagine there's something in this list for all of us here today. There's saints. Let there be no filthiness, no foolish talk, no crude joking, coarse jesting, which are out of place, but instead, let there be thanksgiving. That's green. That's what's going green in my Bible. Don't do these things, do this instead. Green, thanksgiving. But think about that for a second. Instead, what's the opposite of sexual immorality? Right. That's not what I would go directly to. What's the opposite of impurity? Thanksgiving. What's the opposite of greed? Probably thanksgiving on that one. What about with my words? What's the opposite of these words? Thanksgiving. I might not naturally. I wrote down some notes because it was the best I could do, but I think the answer to this came to me this morning while we were doing the Lord's Supper and when Adam led our song, right? So in the Lord's Supper talk especially, we were talking about adultery this morning in Bible class. Heavy subject, and especially we talked about the consequences, the death penalty. And that's just like you could, we're done with this class, and I don't regret it because it's in the Bible and we need to talk about it. But it's not fun and it's heavy. You will leave a class like that feeling heaviness on your shoulders. Like, whoa, man, like that's a lot. And then you start thinking about the death penalty. You do this thing, and the Old Testament law is you're put to death. So we stopped the class there at that point. But we're Christians, and the story doesn't end there. The story goes a little bit farther to talk about how you are not put to death, but instead Christ is put to death. And what's the song that we sang right before it? Live for Jesus, who gave his life so we might live. There still was a death that was paid, justice, but the one who paid it was himself the justifier. And so there's the gospel message for you. And here's why we're talking about it right now. That is something to be thankful for. Oh no, I've committed sexual immorality. And there's this penalty, both with my soul and also with my life. And Christ paid the price for that sin. And that's something to be thankful for. Oh no, my mouth has gotten away with me, and I've said all kinds of things that I shouldn't. And I'm guilty, and I pay the price with my soul and also with my relationships and the consequences. But Christ has paid the price for me with his death, and that's something to be thankful for. And so the opposite of each one of these things is gratitude and thanksgiving to God for what he's done so that there's no inheritance in heaven for you. if this is the way you live. So let's not do that. Walk in love towards other people. That one kind of categorizes everything that we're looking at on this list. We're about to sing the invitation song, I Have Decided to Follow Jesus, which is a great invitation song for this talk that we've been doing, because the idea after walking in unity, walking in holiness, walking in love, is I'm going to model my life and how I behave and how I think and what I say and how I say it. I'm going to model all of that in a way that I walk after Christ. And so if you need some sort of help this morning, forgiveness or support to overcome some sin in your life, or if you're not a Christian and you know what you need to do in order to become one, and we can help you with that today, come forward as we stand and sing the invitation song.